All right. So, hello everybody. Uh, Welcome to first lecture post time adjustment. So if you're here, please turn on your cameras for attendance taking purposes, and just make sure you're here. And also, don't forget about the sheet. Like there's like few of you who forget about them. Um, let's see. We have a good number, five, and um, Cameron, hi. A, a personal question. So, is the tournament still going for the volleyball team, or are you guys done with the season?
Yeah,
I had an
so
email, but I forgot what it said.
it's technically still going. So we're still in season right now. We still have matches, or we play BYU Wednesday and Saturday this week. And then the tournament is
Hmm.
like a little bit smaller. I think there's only 42 teams instead of 64 teams. Um, and it's gonna be like a bubble kind of situation in Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what the email was about. Okay, now now I remember. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Well, good luck and keep us updated on what happened.
Thank you, I will.
All right. So let me share. Oh, uh, there we go. All right. So we're continuing to talk about interviews and interviewing. And so we left. So we stopped last time when I was talking about the no, this part. Okay, we've done this part. And so the we're talking about like asking the question why, and why is an important question, and then why is an important question, and then sometimes it's better to ask it in different ways. So if you look when we said that, because why could be interested like uh, I'm going to miss I'm going to miss next class. Why? So when I say why, it could mean like what's the reason, or like for example, why don't you want to attend the class? So sometimes the question why could be understood depending on the tone and context, as if you're questioning someone's credibility or someone's like motives, this type of thing. So sometimes and because of that, and also to the vagueness, sometimes it's better to ask it in a different way. And here I'm giving an example. So let's say, for example, you switch your uniform or your running shoes from, like, I don't know, Nike to New Balance, vice versa. Like, why did you switch? Is could be could have different meanings, right? So you mean why in terms of like why I left the old brand, or like why I chose the other brand? Because this question why here like about more than one thing. So if you want to ask why, you can ask, okay, what do you like about the new brand? Like what attracted you in the new brand of running shoes, right? What about then the old brand? Or what did you hate about the old brand? What made you think to switch? So that's also asking why, but instead of asking what made you do this, right? How are the two different? Okay. For what for? So someone asks, I buy a new pair of shoes every 6 months. What for? And so it's instead of saying why, because why could mean why are you crazy? Like every 6 months, or or it could be genuinely about the motivation, or like the reason. And so those are small things that would matter. when you try to conduct an interview, like how you ask one question, but in different ways, depending on how appropriate you think it is for the interview subject and also within the context that you're discussing. It's better to have an interview protocol and an interview guide, which is basically listing the fields and subfields or like subcategories of your interview questions, and then different questions for each one, right? So this is something the interviewer would prepare, and it could be as much detail as you want to, depending on your training and how closely you could follow or unfollow, or it could be more flexible. And so this is just like an example. The picture you see in here is an example from an interview conducted. So the subjects were math teachers, like in public school, K-12 schools, and as you could see, the interviewer like divided like the three main focuses of the research. So believe about the nature of mathematics, believe about teaching mathematics, and beliefs about learning mathematics. So teachers teach and students learn. So learning is about reception, teaching is about sending out or educating. And then they divide that into like each one into like subfields or subfocuses or subcategories. So definition of mathematics, and then like based on your belief, what is mathematics? And so here, typically this is only made for like there's only one question just for simplification purposes. But typically you would have more than one question for each subfocus. So definition of mathematics, uh, based on your belief, what is mathematics? You could also say, how do you define mathematics? Or like, when you say mathematics, what do you mean? Or like, when you hear the word mathematics, what comes to mind? So those are four different questions, but technically they're asking the same thing. But sometimes you would need to list four different versions because those would be alternating version. So you, based on what you sense from the interviewee or the subject, which one they would respond better to, you choose from the list like the best format that fits the context, the subject's way of knowledge, that type of thing, right? So yeah, and here, like you see many examples. Uh, because this is for teachers, so the subject interviews, the interview subject, sorry, was teachers. So you see, for example, here the interviewer views how to put it more like high level language or like language meant for intended for people who are highly educated. So elaborate your belief on the effective approach implemented in teaching mathematics. In daily life language, most people don't you talk like that, right? Like effective approach rates, implement this type of thing. Like, but you can ask, what approaches do you find effective, or what ways you found effective in teaching kids math? Right, that's like a more simpler and natural way. So depending on the level of like education, the demographics, the age, all sort of demographic, psychographic variables, you can then design the questions to fit that, right? So even if the subfields will stay the same, you could ultimately have different version of the questions that ask about the same thing, but in different ways, right? And so that's about conducting the interview itself. Then we come to the idea of transcription or transcribing. You know what transcription means? Just not. Transcription, transcribing. What does transcribing mean? Any idea?
Would that be like recording it or like writing it down?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, so writing down, so transcribing through transcription is converting audio into print. That's what it is. print meaning like in digital format or on paper. Back in the old days, you would hear a recorder and then you would be transcribing by hand, either with a pen or like a typewriter. Um, but nowadays, thank God we live in the year 2021, we have digital tools for transcription. And some of them are based on artificial intelligence or AI, i.e. a machine would be transcribing or like converting the audio into text, similar to the AI you have in your smartphone, right? You could use this the, the dictation version on or feature on your keyboard. Say something, like, and then it will write it down, right? So Google search for, and I don't know, closest location for vaccination or for taking the vaccine. And it will catch that and type it down automatically. Um, some of the paid services, so they exist like a host of paid services that are available online. You won't be asked to transcribe anything in this class, but this is just for you. If you ever go into or like conducting interview or like any interviewing project, this could be useful resources for you. One website that I've used before is called Timmy, um, and it costs you like 25 cents per audio minute, like minute or minute of audio. And so if you're having 1 hour of audio, it will cost you $25 plus tax, right? And it uses AI, and it promises about like 90% of accuracy rate. And so the computer won't have 100% accuracy, right? Why do you think that's the case? Why won't the computer get 100% accuracy of like in transcribing an audio into a text? Any ideas? Oops, sorry. Uh, Let me ask you a different way. What would forget about computer? If you are transcribing someone, let's say you're just trying to transcribe my lecture, what would be, so you're typing down whatever someone is saying. Why would that be hard to do?
Maybe it's because like if you're like if the computer is trying to like analyze somebody's voice and maybe how they speak because everybody speaks differently, and then like you have a different accent when it's not like um I'm just thinking it's because people speak differently, so you can't say you have like 100% accuracy if the computer can't analyze different type of speech patterns.
Yeah, that's yeah, absolutely correct. So yeah, like Kylie mentioned a few things or a couple of things. So uh, like accents and tones and pitches and those type of things. A computer would be trained into specific accents, and so if something falls outside that, in the way you say your vowels or you stress some letters, like how you end certain words, uh, or like the intonations, those type of things, the computer or the human being for that matter might not recognize that. So you would miss or like mishear something, right? And so the transcript won't fully reflect the actual speech. And so that's one reason. And then there's another reason with just technology in general, or like recording in general, because there's like background noise, like it's like a dog barking, or like when someone is shutting the door, or moving objects, or two people talking at the same time, so you cannot recognize what's being said. And so it could be easier, at least the human could go back and forth, and we have that ability to adjust for trying to distinguish between the noise and the voice. A computer would just, depending on how complex the programming is, but would ultimately treat it as like one chunk of audio, so it might not be able to transcribe it. And so, yeah, those two things. So hence, you see, for instance, so if you're having human transcriber, would cost more than AI, but it would give you, some of them would promise a 99.9% accuracy rate, right? So those services exist. So AI, so Temi is more like it's the like affordable range, and then they would convert whatever you have into text. Scribe is another one, and it promises like a more accuracy rate. It has like, because it's human transcriber. So they use AI, but then a human would look into the transcript and fix it. A full human transcription would also cost up to $1.25. $1.25. So that's options out there. You have also free options. So Zoom, for instance, give free transcriptions. Well, it's free for us because we're in San Diego's. We're using the University of San Diego package, which ultimately the universities pay for using your tuition money. And so it's sort of free, but it's technically free for us, but you are indirectly paying for it. And so all of my lectures, for example, are transcribed. What I would say is they are not 100% accurate, like the subtitles you're going to see. But if you're doing this, I don't know, for another project, if you're conducting the interview through University of San Diego Zoom, that interview would then be transcribed, and then you can download the transcript from Panopto. So if you're thinking about doing a research project like this, you might consider actually conducting it via Zoom. Even if you're in the same room, so hopefully we'll get back to in-person meetings soon, or sooner than expected. But this is one trick that you could use. There's also the dictation feature in Google Doc and in Microsoft Word. And so dictation is similar to the one I'm talking about. You're going to use an audio keyboard. So you say a full sentence, and then your microphone in your device would catch that and convert it into text. So sometimes people use that for transcribing interviews. They will just have an audio recording, and then we'll open Word doc, and then would open or click on the dictation feature, which you can look up in your own version of Microsoft Word. So once you have the transcript, then comes basically the final step, which is to examine the data or analyze the data. That's the whole point of conducting research. Is to have clean data. And so the way we get data or like interpret data is through content analysis. We talked about content analysis before. So ultimately, if you're doing interviewing, you're bound to do content analysis as well, right? Because you'll be dealing with qualitative data. There are no numbers that you're going to analyze. So ultimately, you need to convert that into some numbers or some themes, depending if you're doing qualitative or quantitative approach. The thing about it is like there's no one true meaning for the interview data. And so because, we've said before, you're conducting multiple interviews, you're having different focus groups. And so you would hear different voices, different points of view, different emotions, different opinions, even like within the same person, the way a person would start the interview could be different than the things they say at the end of the interview. And so, yeah, there's a range of things going on that body of interviewing transcripts. And the thing is, you are trying as an analyst to combine or like to find out common threads within that large body of interview data in order to summarize them, in order to summarize those interview findings into common themes. All right. So there are multiple things that are being said. There are things that are not being said. There are things that are expressed by body language, by tone. There are things that are being neglected. And so your role is try to find out some major themes that try to capture the essence of what people have said in an interview or a sets of interview and focus groups or focus groups, right? So yeah, if you remember the example I gave last week about um, the dealing with remote learning experience, some of you would have different issues, right? Some would talk about complaining about the financial costs. Some would talk about social isolation. Some would talk about productivity. Some would talk about the workload. But ultimately, there would be some commonalities among you, right? And each analyst would look at the data differently, like would connect to different points of view that are expressed on those interviews. So you have to keep an open ear and try to reflect the subject or the interviewee's points of views as much as clearly as possible and as clearly and validly as possible. So with that, we actually covered this before. So the way you're going to analyze it is very, very similar to the content analysis exercises we've done. So if you remember the exercise, so the articles we wrote about analyzing images, or the exercise that I would say most of you have done on analyzing tweets, it's the same thing. So in interviews, mostly you will conduct open coding. You look at data, you generate tags. So for the interview answers that the subject is giving, you'll generate tags that explain different parts of the interviews, right? So this is, okay, this is about isolation. This is about technology. This is about financial hardship. This is about grocery shopping, etc., etc., right? Then you sort those initial codes or tags into overarching themes, right? So you produce some thematic categories that capture or summarize those tags, right? So you're talking, people talking about financial, people talking about tuition, people talking about housing, people talking about paying rent, people talking about the increased cost of delivery. So let's then lump all of that together into like financial issues, right? And then you can then have another one for like social connections or lack thereof. So talking about isolation, loneliness could be grouped into that. And then we can talk then about the academic part, right? So those type of things, yeah, like similar to what you've done with content analysis, you come up with themes that could capture the majority or like the vast majority of tags you generated. Those themes could be based off some theoretical framework that's already been developed, right? So using a theory, as we've seen before in some articles about body image, or like about beauty ideal messages, or about motives for exercise. And so you're going to use those categories and apply them into the interview data you're analyzing. So in other words, how are you going to fit those responses into these pre-established categories? Or you can do something based on your own past research. So you've done research before, let's say, on social isolation, and then now you're applying it to research done on social isolation during COVID. Or as we've done before, the themes could just emerge inductively, as we said, if we are following the inductive approach, just from reading the, the body of the text that you're analyzing. Just from reading it, you could come up with themes that you think could capture what you've read, right? So those are based on your relationship or your interaction or interpretation of the data you're dealing with. So they're not imposed from like an external theoretical framework. Okay? And so for finding themes, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we've explained this part before, right? So it's about content analysis and steps of content analysis, and you've practiced it. But I'm going to emphasize some differences between content analysis for interviews and content analysis for like written text or video. So the first part in content analysis is you try to identify themes or initial themes. And so the researcher or the analyst at the beginning will move back and forth uh, between what you see in a transcript, between like i.e. reading the transcript, and then how you describe the transcript. That is to say the themes you're developing to explain what the transcript is saying, right? So in other words, you conducted an interview with me, with Kate, with Ariana, and then you want to summarize whatever we said into like 4 major themes. Here are like the 5 major themes they talked about. How are you going to do that? Well, you need to interpret first what they've said, right? And you'll be working off a transcript. But if you conducted the interview yourself, there are like different feelings you've got, there are different reactions you had in real time. So as you were conducting the interview, there were different ideas that you shaped about what the other person is saying. And so those would also be used to inform the themes that you're going to generate for the content analysis. And so for that, let me ask you a question and try to think deeply about it. What would be the difference between analyzing a written text, right, like an article or a list of tweets, something like that, versus trying to content analyze human speech or natural speech? Okay, what's like some major differences between the two things, the written text and natural speech? How would they be different if you're trying to analyze or content analyze each one? So different, I mean, in terms of like difficulty, would one be more difficult than the other, or about readability, those sort of things?
I think that the like analyzing human speech that like somebody's speaking to you would be a little bit more easier because you actually can hear what they're saying and how they're saying it. So like if you're in the interview, you could take notes on what their tone is, maybe what their facial expressions are, versus if you're just reading a tweet, you can't really like see or hear how they're saying it. You just have to go based on the words.
Okay, that's a very good one. But what if you're working off a transcript? So you're looking into a transcript of an interview conducted orally versus someone just writing down their ideas. What would be the difference then?
If you're working just off a transcript, I mean, then it'd be the same way, and like you can't really hear what they're saying. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so keep in mind the content analysis happens after the transcript. You have to have a transcript, right? Because you want to capture everything that's been said. Uh, so to ask all of you again, um, would it be harder to interpret a transcript as opposed to a text made for print or like a written document, like a tweet or an article? Which one would be easier or harder? And feel free to answer in the chat if you prefer that. Oops.
Maybe if you were just going off the transcript, it could be, and like it wasn't proofread, it could be harder to read that because there could be a little bit more errors with how the computer or maybe the person transcribed it. So then the tweet could be a little bit more easier to read because the person who was saying it actually wrote it out and maybe they checked it themselves and they made sure that what they want to say is being said.
Yeah. So ultimately, so there's the reason like there would be some gaps in the transcript, right? Either for technological reason or just for natural reason. So let me ask you all again different questions. When you speak, you're just speaking to someone like naturally. You speak like in full sentences, right? But sometimes you just say different things and then there are gaps in between. So how many times you would say ums and like and and then you stop. So when we talk, so when we talk like as in everyday language, we don't we're not giving a speech, right? You're not keeping in mind like I need to have a beginning, a middle, and an ending, and it's like different statements and a conclusion. No, you just speak like freely. And when people talk, they don't give you full thoughts all the time, right? And so when you're going off a transcript, you would realize that like someone said like there's a sentence going on and then it's like then dot 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 and then they talk about something else. Then they go back to the old idea. And so that's why, for instance, if I ask you to express your idea in writing, it's easier than it's easier to fully express it because you could think about it, you could try to articulate it. So it's better articulated than if I ask you just in real time to answer orally, right? So that's why like transcripts are messy when you look at them. And so there's something they generally tend to be much harder actually than analyzing an article. Articles you can like look at the what's like the thesis, the topic like a statement, like conclusion, examples. You can sort them out more neatly as opposed to human speech that is not organized or not actually composed initially to fit a transcript or like a text format. And so for that reason, sometimes you have to go back and forth between like you read the article multiple times, you go to coding, and then you go back and read to see if you missed anything. Sometimes you ask different people to look at it, and so I read the transcript, Kylie read the transcript, Ariana reads the transcript, and we see if we get the same sense from the transcript. Um, you can also, back to what Kylie was saying earlier, you can go back to watch the video or listen to the audio interview to get those missing parts from the transcript, i.e. the body language, the tone, the atmosphere, and those type of things. And your notes, of course, if you're the same person who conducted the interview. And then you come up with the initial codes, and that is to say the major themes that could summarize the answers of the participants, basically. And those would be guided by the research questions, right? So based off the research question you had for which you conducted the interview, would ultimately give you ideas of what themes would emerge. And so let me give you like a quick example. So suppose I'm conducting an interview, conducting an interview, series of interviews about physical activities during pandemic time, like throughout the past year. My research questions, or even my coding categories, right, could be organized into, okay, I will be looking into motives for exercise, or what makes people exercise, what motivates people to exercise, different practices. So do people go out like or like run, or like did they went to like some virtual yoga clubs, or they bought like a Peloton or like an in-home machine, or like they try to gather at someone's basement, or did they go outside, they work outdoors, those type of things. So what type of practices are there? The relationship forming around physical exercise or physical practice, right? Or like physical activities. So yeah, like did it cause you to connect to more people? Did it isolate you from people? And then outcomes, like what outcomes have you gotten from keeping up or tuning down maybe physical activities during pandemics, right? Like psychological outcomes, financial outcomes, maybe social outcomes. So those, those are like five separate things. And ultimately, those would guide me into analyzing the answers from people. So you would say something about the way exercise, and then, okay, let me analyze your answer. So now here you're talking about what motivates you. Here you're talking about how you do it. Here you're talking about what happens after, what you do it for, right? Or what you're getting out of it, right? So it ultimately help you in organizing that large body of text in your transcript. And so once you generate those themes, you will try then to get some codes that support those themes, right? So when you say, for example, let's say one theme that emerged, let's say people exercise to fight depression, right? Or like to try to ease their sense of isolation, that type of things, okay? So that's one theme. I would then need to go back to the transcript and see if there are like some statements that support that. That's something like the people have talked about. So is it common among all of the participants, or is it like, or was it mentioned like in one instance, right? Because if it's mentioned only like in one instance, that means it won't qualify to be a major themes about the full interviewing results. And so, yeah, we need then to adjust it or combine it with something else, right? So once you generate initial codes or themes, you try to find some codes in the transcript that either support it or disconfirm it. And if they are supported enough or substantiated, that means it's actually truly a common theme. If it's not, if there are many things to the contrary of it, then you would need to change it. Which then leads to the third step of the content analysis of interviews. That is, you would evaluate if the themes are like accurately and reliably reflect the opinions or views of the subjects. So again, keep in mind the whole full purpose of the data or like content analysis or coding is to come up with like a summary of people's answers. That's the whole point. Because you cannot tell people everything that's been said in the interviews. But you would say, here are like the 5 major themes that summarize everything that has been said, or like the most important things that were said. And so those things, remember when we said what are like the criteria for content analysis categories? We said they need to be mutually exclusive and they need to be exhaustive. You remember that a little bit? You were in the quiz as well. And so it's similar here, like, so the themes ought to accurately reflect the subject responses, right? So when I say the subjects, like mentioned isolation a lot, or the thing that they say actually about isolation is something else. So this is more about the validity. And then for mutual exhaustion, it's the same, which we call do the theme that emerge, could they accommodate for the vast majority of views expressed in the interviews? So for instance, if we're talking, let's say, about the motivations for exercise. So let's say we have isolation and then, I don't know, keeping up like physical fitness. And third, like maybe like spending time, all right, or coping with work or education stress, okay? Could those 3 themes accommodate for all the reasons that my interview subjects have said? Okay, so they cannot only accommodate for like 20% or 40% of what has been said. They need to accommodate for at least like 90%. And you don't have to actually do quantitative numbers, but if people mention other reasons that cannot be accounted for by your themes, then you need to come up with new themes to accommodate for the people's answers. So similar to, if you remember the exercise on the tweet, remember the sidecar donuts tweets? You have to come up with 4 categories that account for all of the tweets in that data set. So the theme here, like, you have to come with categories that take into account or could account for all of the answers in your interview transcripts. And so for that purpose, the themes could be either narrowed down or broadened or merged or modified or split, depending on what you see in the data. So for instance, if one of the themes I heard in the interviews, let's say about exercise and let's say about exercise and the pandemic, the theme of loneliness. So the theme of loneliness, so loneliness by itself could either be broadened. So we talk about social isolation. So it's not only about loneliness. So you might even have someone that you're living with, but it's about like lack of connectivity. So we could talk about social isolation rather than loneliness. So to account for more things that are not loneliness per se, but at least they're related. So social isolation could be more broad than loneliness. Or for example, if your topic, like, you found people complaining about different types of loneliness, right? So loneliness become very big thing. You can then divide it down into separate types. So you can talk about one theme would be like romantic loneliness. The people were complaining, for instance, that they cannot date during the pandemic, or like you found it harder to date or even to go out with a romantic partner when things are closed. You can then like have like social loneliness, professional loneliness, family loneliness. That is to say, you cannot meet your grandparents, to something. So depending on the data, again, always depend on the data. Whatever the data tells you, the themes have to be adjusted to accommodate them. And then finally, what are the things that you will look into when you're reading a research article that's using like an interviewing approach? So those are like the major questions you should ask yourself. Um, First, like, what was the number of the interviews focus groups conducted, and were they enough? So did the authors conduct 4 interviews, 8 interviews, 10 interviews, 5 interviews, 12 interviews? Were they enough? That is to say, if I interview only 4 students, and ultimately I would say let's represent the views of college students, would that be actually a reliable assessment, or would the authors need more? So we said before, like, no matter how many, like in reality, interviews or qualitative research cannot be generalizable due to logistical limitations. You can only interview like a small number, but at least you have to have some substantial number to say those represent the core views, at least, or some core views from the studied population. How was there an interview guide, or and how was it developed? So did the interviewers or the researcher explain how they came up with the question? Were they working like following a structured, semi-structured, or unstructured interview guide? Which details were provided surrounding that? Was the transcription done manually or by machine? And this is necessary to look at the accuracy of reflecting the participants' answers. So yeah, especially if they're saying they had a large number of interviews, you want to make sure that at least they had the resources to transcribe them, right? Because if the transcription was bad, ultimately the interpretation would also be bad because they would be working off inaccurate data, or like for misspelling reasons or whatnot. And also, how many people coded the transcript? So if someone said, I conducted the interviews and came up with the themes, wouldn't be different than if I actually worked with a partner in coding, or like a different partner coded. So one interviewed and the other partner coded, and then they assisted them. So they would give you an idea of like how accurate the coding process is. Because if you remember, we said when more than 2 coders agree upon something, that means it's more accurate if only one person did it, right? Because it would be less subjective and more shared, right? Sorry for that. Excuse me. And then, yeah, and how were the coding themes or categories developed? So did the authors say we relied on that theory, either from like media studies, media effects, body image, psychological motivation, psychological effects, those type of things, right? Where were the coding coming from? Or did they come up with them just by reading? So they were done inductively, as you said, they read the data and then some themes emerge based on the readings of the data. Those questions are necessary to know how to assess or to critique the analysis. Do you see that the categories were sufficient to reflect the data? Are they clear? So sometimes you would read research articles and you would see that the themes that the author suggested could be, for example, not mutually exclusive. So you would see 2 themes that mean roughly the same thing, or they don't have a very clear meaning, at least to you as a reader, right? So how were like the definitions or explanation of each theme presented? Um, were like the analysis account for all other possible interpretations. So when the authors present, so here's the takeaways from our research. Could they, for example, say, okay, maybe that's actually, there are other things that could be what these interview subjects meant, right? Like they're trying at least to present different theories of what could explain that, or ultimately why they interpret it this way, but not the other way. So that's also when we say what other possible interpretations are presented. And then finally, was the analysis thoroughly presented? So for example, I could interview, like for example, I could conduct an interview with Kate about her satisfaction with the remote learning. And then let's say the department asks you, what did you talk about? Okay, here like 5 points Kate mentioned, and then that's it. Well, do I need to at least say, okay, here's what I mean by each one. Here's like some quotes from the interview subject that support those themes, right? So we talked about like financial hardship, financial burden. And here, like some example of what the interviewee said, right? So those results were substantiated in the presentation, right? Or like in the article that's being presented. So those are like the major questions that you should keep an eye on for when you read a research article based off an interviewing method. So that's it. Those type of questions would you be looking for when you work on, if you're working on activity number 3? So we have an exercise, individual activity that's due this week. And so similar to activity number 1, there's a list of 4 articles, and you would need to pick one article only to analyze. And you would examine the method, the analysis and results presentation of that article. So the assignment is already posted. You have a list of questions and you need to answer them one by one using the same template. If you're working on this one, let me know. You have 1 week to work on it. Let me know if you have questions about it, or you want to talk about it, or you want to have some clarifications about it. Also, this week, we have going to post a new discussion board thread. And so, and don't spend a lot of time on this, but basically, I just want to hear your ideas. And so I'm going to ask you to go back to the first article you posted about. Do you remember? You posted about an article that you found that is related to communication somewhat. Try to come up with the research idea related to that article that can use an interview or a focus group approach, right? Just, yeah, any research idea that is related. So let's say you cite an article about kids and smartphones. What type of an interview will you conduct to explore that topic, right? So it's not going to be a research proposal or anything like that, just like a short paragraph giving me a general research idea, right? Or like why, and then are you using a focus group or interview, and why? And what's like the idea behind that? That's it. So this is only meant to stimulate your idea or like your creativity of what research ideas you could come up with. And so this is also something you have the full week to work on. But yeah, please don't spend a lot of time on this one and focus on the individual activity if you decide to solve this one. It will going to be worth 15 points, right? So keep that in mind, right? So this is one of the 15-point activities. Do you have any questions regarding the assignment, topic, anything else, grades? Okay, so if you don't have any questions, then I'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.